What is up, guys? Old Line Games here, back with another video, and I'm a little bit sick right now, so sorry if you hear that in my voice. But today, I thought I'd make a cool video because, you know, the holidays are coming up, and I wanted to give you guys some gift ideas. Specifically today, I'm going to be talking about how you can make an awesome gaming PC for you or someone else as a gift for really cheap, actually, and this is one of the cheapest ways to do it. You'll find a ton of videos on YouTube of people pulling this off and it actually working really well. I just wanted to deliver a 2017 how-to guide by using this method. This method basically involves taking a pre-built computer that you can acquire for pretty cheap that has a decent CPU, buying a very good performing GPU, upgrading the PSU in the tower, and boom, you have a gaming computer. It sounds complicated, but it's really easy. It's along the lines of building your own computer, but it's not really as hard because the pre-built comes pre-assembled, as it would suggest. Also, this can yield very cost-effective gaming, and it's a really good idea if you want to get into PC gaming. So to start off, if you already have a desktop computer, which I know a lot of people have just for like web browsing and stuff, you may already be able to skip the first step in this guide because you already have a computer. What you're going to want to do is type in about PC in your search bar for Windows. You're looking for, in the processor section, a Core i5 or i7 in the 2000 series or above. This is to ensure that the CPU will not buckle during gaming performance. You want to have enough CPU power to run all the latest games. It's not as important as the GPU power, but an i3 or anything that's before the 2000 series may not yield the same performance or be able to deliver that 60 FPS smooth gameplay. In terms of RAM, we really want 8 GB or above. 4 or 6 is doable in some cases, but it might restrict you in some of the newer AAA titles, namely a title I can think of off my head that uses a ton of RAM. GTA 5 sucks up so much RAM. I used to have 8 GB in my machine, now I have 24, but it would just eat up RAM, that game. And also, if you don't go with 8 GB, you won't be able to have stuff like Chrome or Discord really open in the background because they'll be sucking away performance from your games. Something to think about. If you want to stick with 4 or 6, some people swear by it and say that buying more RAM is an unnecessary cost for a gaming PC, but you may find it useful, as I do, to have that additional RAM. Also, as programs and games start using more RAM, you kind of want more RAM to stay on the more future-proof side of things. So, if you don't have a desktop computer, it's all good because we're going to take this to step 1, which is go on eBay to find a pre-built to be the base of your system. Now, what we're looking for here are used or refurbished pre-built systems. So, what you're looking for is an i5 or above in the 2000 series or above, just as I mentioned in the previous section if you already have a computer. Some processors that would be good are the i5 2500, i7 2600, anything in the 3000s or 4000s as an i5 or an i7 will actually be really good. And if you can find something in the $150 to $200 range with that CPU and 8 GB of RAM, I would jump on that deal. But if you can't afford those higher end CPUs, 2500 PCs are pretty cheap, and you should be able to acquire them with 8 GB of RAM. They will perform great in games, while not as high frame rates as you could get with something like the brand new shiny 8700K. It's extremely cost effective and a great way to get into PC gaming, which is what this guide is all about. So one thing I want to warn you guys about is it probably will say in the eBay listing, but some of these PCs, because they are sold by people who just don't need a pre-built anymore, are stripped of their hard drives. So people keep these hard drives to keep their data or just to use as extra storage, and what they'll do is they'll just sell the computer without the hard drive. Not a huge issue. You can get hard drives for pretty cheap, but just keep note of that because you may need to take that into account for your budget if you're buying a computer that doesn't have storage installed. Next, we're going to the GPUs. So one GPU I found recently is the GTX 780. Now, 780 was the top of the line graphics card back in the day from NVIDIA. Nowadays, it's a little bit dated, but you can get them for about the same price as a GTX 1050 that is brand new. And it will perform way better. You'll be able to get much higher frame rates, and you know, some people have even said that you can play in 1440p in some titles with a 780. I wouldn't try it in the AAA titles, but you guys can try it if you want. The reason I say this is a better purchase than the 1050 or the 1050 Ti is because in the case of the 1050 Ti, it's cheaper, it outperforms it a little bit, and I think it's worth saving this money and getting this card, despite the fact that it will consume a bit more power. It's something that's unavoidable, but I think for the price you can get this card at, and I'll leave a link in the description for a really cheap one, it can be worth it for that extra performance. If you want some alternatives for graphics cards from Team Red in the same range as a 780, you can look for a 280X or a 290 used. However, these cards run hotter and they're not as good performance in certain games, and you'll find that the prices are currently inflated due to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency mining because the AMD cards excel in that type of workload. If you guys want to buy new cards, the 1050, the RX 560 from AMD, and the GTX 1050 Ti will play your games at 1080p 60 frames per second in medium to high settings depending on the game. One pro of these cards is you will not need to buy a power supply because they can be powered off the PCIe power from your motherboard. So you can skip the next part if you get a 1050, 560, or certain 1050 Ti's that don't require external power. Stepping it up to the 1063GB, it'll play your games at 1080p 60 in max to ultra settings. In some games, might have to drop it down to medium because of that 3GB of VRAM. However, if you step up to the 1060 with 6GB, everything will be at max to ultra settings at 1080p 60, and those extra gigs of VRAM can step it up to 1440p in some games at medium to high settings, close to 60 FPS, not always at that exact cap. If you want to step it up into the high end, this is where the cutoff for the high end is. And just a fair note, if you're getting a PC with a 2500, this may bottleneck some of these higher end cards, so I would look for a higher end CPU in your base system if you're going to go for the higher end cards. The GTX 1070 or the AMD RX Vega 56 will play your games in 1440p at high to max settings at a comfortable 60 FPS. The 1070 Ti or the Vega 56 with a non-reference cooler, which allows for higher overclocking and more performance, will play at 1440p at ultra settings. In some games can play at 4K in medium to high settings. 1070 Ti, especially at this price range of around $450 to $500, has really good 4K graphics performance. So if you have a 4K monitor or 4K TV, this could be interesting for you. A Vega 56 non-reference cards are not too plentiful nowadays, but more are coming out, and Gamers Nexus has shown that given the right cooling, these things can outperform the Vega 64 in some cases, just because they're really similar chips and you can just overclock the crap out of them. Stepping it up to the highest of the high end, the NVIDIA GTX 1080 and the 1080 Ti will play any game at 4K high to max settings. At 1080 Ti can do max settings. You can play at 60 FPS on the GTX 1080, or you can play at 60 or above FPS on the 1080 Ti just because of how powerful that card is. One thing to note about the 1080 Ti is it'll actually be a little bit future proof. Obviously, once the next graphics cards come out, you can't stop it from being outdated, but it will still be able to play the next generation of games at high resolution, high settings, high frame rate. They're the top of the top. And one thing to note, the Vega 64 is in this price range and performance tier. However, I wouldn't consider it a smart option due to its extremely high power consumption and the fact that right now they can't be found at low enough prices to warrant buying them. So the 1080 and 1080 Ti really dominate this performance tier of the market. Moving on from the GPU, you now have to purchase your PSU or power supply unit. Now what I recommend is going on Amazon and getting an 80 plus, I would say white or bronze or above is a pretty good standard. And you want 500 watts or above if you're going with the 780 I suggested for a quick and easy gaming PC, because you need to supply that power to the card for it to operate and perform well. And you don't want to get like a really shady power supply or use the pre-installed power supply in your tower, just because those risk damaging parts in your system due to unreliable power. They've exploded in some cases. I've heard stories of them exploding. You really just want to get a really solid power supply that you can trust. And think about this when you're building your PC. if you want higher wattage, this will allow you to upgrade your parts in the future to a higher power consumption component without having to worry about upgrading the power supply in addition to your graphics card or processor. So this could be something to take into consideration if you plan on upgrading your computer in the future. Another thing to note is if you don't go with the 780 I suggested, you will have to check the power recommendations for the card that you purchase and make sure that you're safely within those power recommendations, just so you can have all the performance you really want. Keep in mind, the more money you spend on the cards, especially with the Vega 56, if you end up purchasing that card, you will need an extremely beefy power supply because they are very high power consumers. So once you get all these parts, you can just put them all together. It's not that hard. You just got to install the PSU, wire it all up, put in the graphics card and the motherboard. Shouldn't be too hard. And there you have a kick-ass gaming PC for you or your friends or family that you want to give it to for the upcoming holidays. And it was super cheap, and you saved a ton of money as opposed to getting one of the pre-built gaming PCs nowadays. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a thumbs up, and if you want to see more PC tech videos like this, make sure to leave a comment below and also leave a thumbs up. That lets me know that. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great day and a great week if I don't post again and get to talk to you guys. That's it for today. Peace out.